They say a pale harp rests in the ossuary at Rel. To the eye it is flawless, smooth and gleaming as ivory, its strings stretched fine, its frame elegant in form. A thing of beauty, yet its silence hides the dreadful price of its making. Dalen of Rel was a bard of good reputation. His hands were steady, his technique admired in courts and taverns alike. Notes fell where he placed them, neat as a mason's line, and he was often called faultless. But his music, though skillful, never lingered. People clapped, offered coins, and turned back to their cups unchanged. One winter night in the hall of Lord Keldan, Fowlin played as he always did, precise, careful, each note where it should be. When he ended, the steward raised his voice and called the performance flawless. Yet an older woman at the long table, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, shook her head. "All skill, Master Bard," she said, "yet hollow. Your playing moves the hand, but never the heart." The words struck like a blade, sharper than praise could heal. That night, Valen dreamed, not of a tune, but of a sound, bright, radiant, alive. A tone that seemed to carry meaning itself, as though each note could hold light. When he woke, he could still feel it trembling in his chest. But when he reached for it with his harp, the wood gave only emptiness. Days later, passing the churchyard, he paused at the ossuary. The winter wind seeped through its stones, stirring the heaps of rib and skull within. One rib thrummed against another, humming like a plucked string. Fallon touched it, and the vibration climbed his arm and settled into his chest. Wood was hollow, but bone carried the weight of what once lived. He began cautiously, first with animals, ox ribs purchased from the butcher, stag horn from hunters, strings of gut pulled taut. The tones grew richer, fuller, nearer to the brilliance he sought. Then came the turn to men. Apothecaries sold powdered bone for remedies, and physicians kept fragments for their studies. Phelan bought what he could. He polished the shards until they gleamed white as ivory, and with reverence, he shaped them into his harp. The change was not subtle. When he played, the sound deepened. It was not merely heard, but felt. Listeners wept without knowing why. Some praised him as transformed. Others left shaken, clutching their ribs, as though something inside them stirred an answer. Yet still, the radiant tone eluded him. So he turned at last to the ossuary itself. By candlelight, he chose with care, ribs worn smooth by time, finger bones curled as though they still remembered their grasp, fragments of hands and arms shaped by work long ended. Each he polished until it shone, fitting them into the frame until the harp was whole. Pale, perfect, beautiful to behold, and terrible only in the truth of what gave it form. Still, it was not complete. Phelan knew what remained. One night, in silence, he laid out knife and chisel. The tools gleamed faintly in the candlelight, set with the same care he gave to his harp. Then he pressed the blade to his side and cut until bone showed white beneath cut flesh. His breath came ragged, each movement burning, but he did not stop. Inch by inch he worked the rib free, cradling it like something precious. When it came loose at last, he pressed hot iron to the wood. The stench of seared flesh filled the room, and the pain near broke him, but the bleeding slowed. He bound his side in cloth before dawn, enough to let him rise again and return to his music. When the work was done, he polished it with shaking hands, turning pain into purpose, until it shone pale as ivory. When he was summoned again to Lord Caudan's hall, whispers rose at the sight of him. Pale and trembling, he could hardly stand. Yet the harp in his hands gleamed immaculate in the firelight, flawless as pearl. He raised his hands to the strings, and the hall fell still. The sound that rose was clear, radiant, alive. It was not sorrow he found, but brilliance, a voice in the harp that seemed to shine with meaning itself. Each note rang bright as glass in sunlight, each chord full as breath. Faces lifted toward the sound, transfixed, as though it carried light into the rafters. At last the final chord rose and held, bright and beautiful, until silence claimed it. Valen bowed his head, lips faintly curved in triumph. Then his body slumped against the frame, and he was still. No applause followed. The nobles and servants sat frozen, shaken by what they had heard and by the sight of the price it had taken. The next day, they buried the bard, but none would claim the harp. It was carried to the ossuary, where it rests still, pale, perfect, and silent. Some say Phelan did at last prove his critic wrong, that he found the sound that could stir the soul, but he never lived to taste the glory of it. For the price of his music was the marrow of his bones, the breath in his lungs, and the beating of his heart. He sought a sound that carried life, and to give it voice, he surrendered his own.